Eleanor, did you pack his crispest white shirt, the one for big meetings, and his favourite heather grey sweater, the cashmere blend? It's getting so chilly out there, darling, practically sniffing at winter's heels. And please don't forget these, special wool socks, the ones that keep my son's toes toasty no matter what. Martha, Daniel's mother, fluttered around her daughter-in-law Eleanor, her hands hovering, her heart overflowing with loving concern as Eleanor meticulously packed Daniel's suitcase for yet another one of his business trips. Martha was trying to help, of course, but if she were truly honest, she was mostly just a delightful, distracting presence in Eleanor's carefully orchestrated routine. Eleanor had the packing down to an art form, a symphony of folded fabrics and tucked-away toiletries. Daniel's trips to various construction sites had become a frequent rhythm in their lives, and she could assemble his suitcase in the dark, every item perfectly placed, every crease smooth. Yet a faint familiar ache always settled in her chest. She didn't like these journeys, but what could a wife do? It was his calling, his budding construction venture. The profits weren't exactly soaring yet, but it was a seed, a hopeful promise of future abundance. So, in her heart, there was no real concern about his travels, no whisper of fear that he might stray. She believed in him utterly. She believed he loved her with the quiet, steadfast devotion of a man who didn't need grand gestures. Oh, they had their little tiffs, certainly. Sometimes Daniel would snap, a quick, sharp word or a dismissive wave of his hand. But that was just his nature, a rough edge she'd learned to smooth with her own gentle understanding. Just now he'd barked at his own dear mother, his voice a low rumble. "Are you trying to make me miss my train? Why are you fussing so much, mother? Eleanor and I would manage perfectly well without your hovering." "I know, dear, I know," Martha demurred, her voice soft as a dove's coo. "But a mother wants to help too, doesn't she? I know you'll manage. Your wife, Daniel, is a gift from heaven, truly. Look at these delectable flaky apple turnovers she baked for you, and that rich, hearty stew she simmered all morning." Eleanor truly was an exceptional cook. It wasn't merely her professional polish. She was the esteemed head chef at the Golden Spoon Bistro, a place renowned for its comforting, sophisticated fare, but a deep, abiding love for the culinary arts, a passion that had bloomed in her hands since childhood. Even Daniel, whose plate was as discerning as his temperament was brusque, would sometimes not exactly praise, that would be entirely too effusive for him, but when asked about a meal, he might offer a gruff, "It's decent." In his tightly guarded world of words, that was the highest possible commendation, for more often than not he'd find some tiny flaw, some minuscule imperfection. Eleanor never took offence. Her heart simply swelled with the certainty that this was his way of loving her. The greatest, most profound evidence of that love, the one that rooted itself deepest in her soul, was his unexpected, miraculous agreement to adopt a child. They had been married for so many cherished years, and still the nursery remained empty, a silent ache in their otherwise vibrant home. Eleanor had visited countless specialists, endured endless, draining tests, but no one could find a definite reason. One highly esteemed doctor, a woman with kind but weary eyes, had even grown exasperated with Eleanor's solo visits. "My dear, from whom exactly do you plan to have a child? Your husband? Well, where is he? Why isn't he here with you? Don't return without him and his test results." But Daniel refused to even entertain the idea. "Everything's fine with me," was his only unshakable and ultimately unhelpful reply. It was then that Eleanor, with a trembling heart, had cautiously whispered about adoption. She had braced herself for immediate rejection, a dismissive wave of his hand. But to her utter astonishment, Daniel had suddenly said, "All right, but no infants. Someone a little older, who can already hold a conversation, understand things, and definitely a boy, an heir. And so, like a quiet dawn breaking, their son Ethan entered their lives. Eleanor chose him, or rather, it wasn't a choice so much as a divine recognition. The moment her gaze fell upon him, sitting quietly in the corner of the children's home recreation room, his dark, thoughtful eyes meeting hers, with a depth beyond his years, she simply knew. "My son," she had breathed, a silent vow that echoed through her very being. She didn't even glance at the other eager, hopeful faces. Daniel, predictably, merely offered, "He seems like a decent kid." And that was that. The director of the Sunrise Haven Children's Home, a kindly woman with spectacles perched on her nose, had offered a gentle, necessary caution. "Ethan has no living parents, so you won't have any complications there, but please be aware, he has a twin brother. He was adopted as an infant many years ago, an unfortunate oversight in the system. So while a reunion is theoretically possible, it's quite a rare chance." For Eleanor, it didn't matter. Her heart had recognized its own. This boy, Ethan, was hers, unequivocally. She hadn't been wrong. Ethan adapted to their home seamlessly, like a thirsty plant finally finding its true soil. He quickly blossomed, becoming a true son, and Eleanor, in turn, a true mother, her nurturing spirit finally finding its fullest expression. Daniel, however, remained somewhat cool, perhaps even a little distant towards Ethan, but then he was distant with everyone, a mountain standing aloof. That too was simply his way. So, in the grand scheme of their family, everything truly was beautiful. His mother, Martha, adored Eleanor, treating her not just as a daughter-in-law, but as the daughter she'd never had, and cherished Ethan as her precious grandson. Eleanor truly had little to complain about, her days filled with warmth and quiet contentment. If only, she often mused, it weren't for those incessant business trips. Eleanor's unease, a tiny persistent gnawing in the quiet corners of her mind, was not unfounded. Those business trips were a carefully constructed facade, a delicate web of deceit. Daniel did indeed travel for the company, but he also meticulously carved out time for his own deeply personal hidden agenda. A trip that should have lasted a mere day or two would stretch into a full, indulgent week. The remaining free time, the hours unaccounted for, were spent in the intoxicating company of his mistress, a stunning, vibrant woman named Chloe. She was not only a breathtaking beauty, but quick-witted, wonderfully understanding, and most importantly, she adored him with an almost desperate intensity. She'd call him, her voice throaty with longing, murmuring, "Honey, isn't it time for another business trip? Your company needs your undivided attention, darling." And without a flicker of remorse, he'd dutifully relay this manufactured urgency to Eleanor. He planned to execute the same deceptive maneuver this time. Under the guise of a crucial business trip, he packed a few essentials from his office, then headed straight to Chloe's sleek modern apartment. They revelled in their stolen moments, a luxurious, secret world in a charming boutique hotel on the other side of town. They tried to be discreet, of course, a practiced dance of deception. The complication, the tiny crack in Chloe's carefully curated world, was that she wasn't entirely unattached. Not married, no, but she had recently, and rather messily, broken off a long, tiresome relationship. So, at the hotel, after an afternoon of their shared affection, Chloe and Daniel settled into the plush hotel sofa. He was far too controlling, she mused, recalling her recent ex-partner. Always trying to dictate my every move, but now, she took Daniel's hand, her gaze lingering on his, now I feel truly free to consider what comes next. Danny, darling, is there a real place for me in your life? A permanent one? Her question hung in the air, weighted with years of unspoken longing, for she had harboured aspirations for this very position in Daniel's world for a long, long time. "Of course, my love," Daniel murmured, his voice laced with practised reassurance, though a flicker of something unreadable crossed his features. "Do you truly think I would ever step away from you so easily? No, my sweet Chloe. Life without you would be nothing short of purgatory." "But your wife, Daniel," Chloe gently reminded him, a hint of concern or perhaps curiosity in her tone. Daniel scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. "My Eleanor? She's utterly consumed by the mundane. Her world revolves around meal planning and laundry. She's good for little else. Can't even bear a child." A note of genuine disgust crept into his voice, chilling Chloe's pleasant reverie. Chloe's brow furrowed in surprise. "But you have a son, don't you, Danny? Ethan?" "Yes, there's Ethan," Daniel conceded, a distant quality to his voice. "But he's not really ours. I've told you he's adopted, a foster child just taken in." At that moment, a soft knock preceded the chambermaid's entrance. Her presence, a silent shadow moving through the luxurious suite, seemed to spark an idea in Chloe's mind. "And when I am your wife, Daniel," she declared, her eyes bright with a new vision, "I won't be involved in such mundane tasks. We'll have staff for that, won't we? You, my dear," she addressed the chambermaid, a patronising smile on her lips, "would you be interested in working for us then?" The chambermaid, a woman with weary but observant eyes, paused her tidying. "My rates are quite high," she replied dryly, her voice flat, and then, without another word, she quietly exited the room. "Well, did you see that?" Chloe fumed, her momentary irritation quickly replacing her earlier dreaminess. "Such insolence! We certainly wouldn't hire someone so rude." Only Daniel's kisses, tender and distracting, managed to coax her back into her former blissful, fantastical mood. Meanwhile, unknown to Daniel, that chambermaid was a familiar face to Eleanor. Daniel, entirely consumed by his clandestine romance, hadn't recognised her, but Anna, the chambermaid, remembered him perfectly. Not long ago, she had worked in that very same bistro, as Eleanor, bustling through the kitchen, a quiet observer of Eleanor's seemingly perfect life. She often saw Daniel, a striking figure, stopping by to visit his wife. Though they weren't close friends, Anna harboured a quiet, persistent envy of Eleanor. How could she not? Eleanor had everything: a successful career as a chef, a stable marriage, and a husband who wasn't just anyone, but a respected businessman. And above all, Eleanor often spoke, with a soft glow in her eyes, about how deeply he loved her. Anna, in stark contrast, was navigating her own life alone, battling daily loneliness. To make matters worse, she had recently been let go from the Golden Spoon, a harsh blow that forced her to take this job at the hotel. A step down, she felt. Yet, ironically, it was thanks to this new, less glamorous work that she stumbled upon this shocking truth about Eleanor's cherished happiness. A cruel thought began to form in her mind. Perhaps I should share this news. Why should Eleanor have it all, flaunting her great love? Anna, a bitter seed taking root in her heart, pulled out her phone. Her fingers, usually quick and efficient, hovered over Eleanor's number, a former colleague she hadn't spoken to in months. After a brief, strained greeting, Anna, with a deceptive nonchalance, delivered the devastating news: where and with whom Eleanor's husband was currently staying. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor scoffed, her voice incredulous, a tight knot forming in her stomach. "He's on a business trip right now, in another city entirely." "He's in our city, Eleanor, at the Rosewood Inn," Anna retorted, her voice lacking any warmth. "I even took a quick photo on my phone. It's a bit blurry, but I think you'll recognise him." A moment later the photo arrived. Yes, the image was indistinct, the faces blurred, but still, a chilling doubt began to creep into Eleanor's heart, a cold tendril of fear. To confirm her darkest suspicions, she decided to drive directly to Daniel's office. There, she heard the words that shattered her world. Daniel's boss, a kind older man, explained that Daniel hadn't been sent anywhere. He had simply requested a few days off, promising to work remotely from home. "We were happy to accommodate, Eleanor," his boss added, his voice soft with sympathy, "especially considering your adopted son's recent difficulties, and Daniel mentioned your own health hasn't been the best either." Eleanor walked home, the city lights blurring through her unshed tears, her mind reeling. Divorce, she thought, the word a bitter taste in her mouth. That was the only path left now. Anna hadn't lied, and her husband, the man she had trusted implicitly, had lied to everyone, using fabricated problems with their adopted child and even her own imagined poor health as a cynical shield for his infidelity. But as she stepped through her front door, the silence of the house pressing in on her, she realised the problems were real. Just moments ago, Ethan's teacher had called, her voice tight with concern, explaining that Ethan had slipped out during recess and shattered a display window at the local candy shop, a favourite haunt of the neighbourhood kids. "No, I don't believe it," Eleanor had protested, her voice trembling. "Ethan never acts out like that. He's not a troublemaker." "I wouldn't have believed it either, Eleanor, but several children saw him," the teacher insisted gently. "And truthfully, I've noticed lately that sometimes your son seems different, as if he's been swapped out for someone else entirely." Eleanor, her heart heavy with a new kind of dread, had to pay for the shattered window. She walked home with Ethan, trying to coax the truth from him. Her son remained silent, acting strangely withdrawn. But eventually, with great reluctance, he confessed that he had accidentally met a boy who looked exactly like him, a mirror image. "Impossible!" Eleanor gasped, suddenly remembering the foster home director's words. His twin! It had happened, the rare chance. "And who is this boy?" she asked, her voice laced with trepidation. "Does he have parents?" "He only has a dad," Ethan whispered, his gaze distant. "He's nice, but he drinks sometimes. I visited their house once, and he, Sasha, came to our house too. We sometimes swap places just for fun, and no one ever notices," Ethan admitted, a flicker of mischievous pride in his eyes. "And he broke the window. It was an accident, really." "So, who are you right now?" Eleanor asked, a cold dread washing over her. "I'm Ethan," her son insisted, his eyes wide. But after such a startling confession, Eleanor couldn't simply take his word for it. She reached out, grasping his hand, and saw a familiar bump beneath her fingers, the small distinctive scar on his wrist from a childhood fall. Yes, this was her son, her own Ethan. "All right," Eleanor sighed, her resolve hardening. "We're going to have to see this Sasha. I'll talk to his father, and we'll figure out how to prevent these kinds of problems in the future." Sasha's father, Noah, a man whose face was etched with the quiet burdens of life, looked at Eleanor with an even deeper bewilderment than she had felt. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, running a hand through his already dishevelled dark hair. "They never told me there were two of them." He shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and a flicker of something akin to wonder on his face. Eleanor, choosing her words carefully, sensing the tender wound she might be touching, gently inquired about Sasha's mother. "And Sasha's mother, is she—" A shadow crossed Noah's face, darkening his eyes. Mother? What mother? She just up and left us. Got tired of pretending to be the good one, he said, his voice laced with a bitter resentment, a raw edge of old pain. Eleanor's gaze swept around the small, simply furnished house. It wasn't impoverished or even particularly untidy, but it undeniably bore the quiet, lonely mark of a home without a woman's touch, a palpable absence of warmth and nurturing. A sudden heartfelt impulse stirred within Eleanor. "If you'd like," she offered, her voice soft but earnest, "I could come by sometimes, help out. Maybe prepare some meals, or just lend a hand with things." Sasha's eyes, wide with hope, immediately brightened, but Noah's response was far from welcoming. "Thanks, but no thanks," he said, his tone brusque, almost defensive. "We're not starving over here. We manage just fine without charity." "You shouldn't dismiss it so easily. I offered from the heart," Eleanor sighed, a small ache forming in her chest at his rejection. "But you would at least allow the boys to connect. Let Sasha visit our house, and Ethan can come here." She watched him, hoping, silently pleading for this one small bridge. Noah considered her, a long, assessing look in his eyes. Finally a grudging nod. "And what reason would I have to object? Let them be friends. They are brothers after all." And so it happened. Daniel returned from his business trip just as Sasha was visiting his brother. Daniel's mood was foul, a dark cloud of unspoken grievances, and he immediately began to air his complaints, his voice booming through the house. "What is this, Eleanor? The house is filled with kids again. Can't a man get a moment's peace and quiet after a long journey? And they're both identical, for heaven's sake." He frowned, his eyes narrowing, as he took in Sasha's face, a perfect replica of Ethan's. That's his twin brother, Daniel," Eleanor stated, her voice trembling slightly, dread chilling her blood. "The one from the foster home." "Well, congratulations," Daniel sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "As if one wasn't enough. Now we've been blessed with a second one." He launched into a tirade, a storm of accusations. Eleanor knew Daniel was about to twist the conversation, to make her the villain in his narrative. She wouldn't let him. Without a moment's hesitation, she firmly ushered the boys out of the room, sending them to the kitchen, and then, her voice ringing with an uncharacteristic steel, she laid bare everything she had learned from Chloe's careless words and Daniel's own boss. Daniel listened, mouth agape, his voice paling as the weight of her words settled upon him. But Daniel was not a man to surrender, even when cornered. His shock quickly transmuted into a furious defensive rage. "So, this is it then," he roared, his fists clenching. "You've been spying on me, following me. You even went to my work, humiliating me with your ridiculous questions." "Me? Humiliated you?" Eleanor's voice rose, a fiery indignation finally bursting forth. "Or did you humiliate yourself and me along with you by cavorting with another woman in hotels?" Despite their desperate attempts to shield the boys from this ugly confrontation, Ethan and Sasha heard every word through the thin door. Their innocent faces, a mirror of distress, appeared in the doorway, hoping perhaps to mend the irreparable. "Dad, don't yell at Mum," Ethan pleaded, his voice small, brimming with fear. "What's this then? A little protector? Is that what we have here?" Daniel snarled, lunging towards his son, his rage untamed. "And in duplicate, no less. What is this, I ask you?" He glared at Sasha, then back at Ethan, his eyes filled with a cruel, unfeeling disgust. "I already regret allowing one foster child into my home, my barren wife, and now it turns out that there are two of them. I don't even want to see this second one in my house again." Eleanor, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, instinctively pulled both boys into a tight embrace, shielding them from Daniel's venom. But they wrestled free, their faces pale with shock and hurt, and bolted out of the apartment. "Don't go far! I'll come find you!" Eleanor screamed after them, her voice raw with desperation. Outside in the cold, darkening evening, Sasha looked at Ethan, his face etched with sympathy. "Your dad's a real piece of work, Ethan. My dad, even if he has too much beer, he never acts like that." "Did he hurt your mum?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking slightly, still trying to process the raw hatred he'd witnessed. "No, he doesn't hit," Sasha replied, a flicker of protectiveness in his eyes. "And he's not so bad, really. Maybe he's just tired." Ethan, ever the loyal son, defended his father even amidst the pain. "Where should we go?" he asked Sasha, looking around. "We could go to my place," Sasha offered, "but I don't feel like sitting at home. Maybe the park. We could swing on the swings." And with that, the boys momentarily, forgetting Eleanor's plea to stay close, took off running towards the park. It wasn't far from home, so they felt safe, sure they could be found there. Back in the apartment, with the children gone, a full-blown argument erupted. Eleanor and Daniel, no longer holding back, unleashed years of simmering resentments. "So, you've been cheating on me all this time, gallivanting around on your business trips," Eleanor raged, her voice cracking with fury and betrayal. "Why did you do it? If you didn't love me, if you didn't want me, why didn't you just get a divorce? Why lie? Why humiliate us both?" "If I didn't love you, I wouldn't have stayed," Daniel shot back, his face contorted in a sneer. "Who else would live with a barren woman?" "We still need to figure out who's barren, Daniel," Eleanor retorted, her voice rising to a crescendo. "You refused to get tested. You were the one who agreed adopting in the first place." "Adopt, yes, but one child," he spat. "And what kind did you pick?" "The one with a twin." "I knew this would cause problems." "And that's just fine," Eleanor declared, her voice ringing with cold resolve, a sudden fierce strength hardening her spine. "I'd rather have 2 sons than one treacherous husband." The words, sharp as shattered glass, hung in the air, but then a new terrifying thought pierced through her anger. "Wait, where are the boys?" Her voice dropped to a frantic whisper. "Ethan didn't even put on his scarf. He just ran out." She glanced at Daniel, her eyes blazing as she frantically pulled on her coat. "That's it! I'm filing for divorce!" Bursting out of the apartment, she scanned the courtyard wildly. No sign of the boys. Maybe they ran to Sasha's, she thought, a desperate hope fluttering. Yes, that's right. They shouldn't be out in the cold. But at Noah's house there was no sign of them either. "No, they haven't come by," Noah said, surprised to see her, his brow furrowed with concern. "I just dropped Sasha off at your place. I was hoping everything would be fine." "It was, Noah. It was fine," Eleanor insisted, her voice tight with rising panic. "But then they ran out to play somewhere." "All right, let's go find them," Noah said, his voice firm, already reaching for his jacket. They hurried to the nearby park, their breath misting in the cold air. As they approached, a small desperate cry for help pierced the quiet night. Responding to the urgent call, they stumbled upon a horrifying scene. The small pond, usually a shimmering expanse, was now stretched taut with the season's first treacherous layer of ice. Ethan and Sasha, remembering the joyful winters when children would glide and twirl on sturdy frozen surfaces, had decided to break in the new path, planning to cross the entire pond. What they hadn't accounted for was the deceptive warmth of the early season, the thinness of the ice, a mere whisper of winter's promise. Yet the boys had managed to venture a considerable distance from the bank, their laughter echoing across the still water. Then, with a sickening crack, the ice beneath them gave way. One of the brothers scrambled back from the jagged maw of the open water, but the other plunged through the frigid surface with a splash that seemed to mock the silence. Eleanor, understanding instantly that rushing onto the unstable ice was an act of futile self-destruction, that all four of them would be swallowed by the cold, froze in terror. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the backdrop of her helplessness. But Noah, Sasha's father, didn't hesitate. His movements were swift, decisive. He ripped off his coat, already shedding seconds, and plunged forward, a desperate beacon of courage, towards the struggling child. The thin ice fractured effortlessly beneath his weight, but he pushed on, a man driven by pure primal instinct. Mercifully, the pond wasn't deep, so he didn't have to swim. Instead, he forged a path of broken ice, reaching the boy just before he disappeared beneath the icy surface. With a mighty, desperate heave, Noah pulled the child from the water. "Everyone home, now," he commanded, his voice gruff but urgent. He stripped the sodden, clinging jacket from the shivering child and wrapped him tightly in his own coat, still warm from his body heat. "Noah, you'll freeze solid," Eleanor cried, suddenly shrugging out of her own coat. But the man was already running towards his house, a dark, determined silhouette against the fading light. Eleanor gripped the hand of the second boy, pulling him close. "Ethan, darling, let's run." "I'm Sasha," the shivering child corrected her, his voice muffled by her coat. "I couldn't save him." "You both would have been lost if it weren't for your father," Eleanor gasped, breathless from terror and exertion. They reached Noah's modest home surprisingly quickly, and their immediate focus shifted to the boy who had been submerged. They rubbed his cold limbs, quickly dressed him in dry, warm clothes, and poured hot, sweet tea down his throat, coaxing warmth back into his small frame. "Noah, you need to think about yourself," Eleanor kept repeating, her voice laced with concern. "You haven't even changed." "I'm fine," he responded curtly, dismissing her worries with a wave of his hand. But as it turned out, he wasn't. Once the boy, now warm and calm, had finally drifted into a peaceful sleep, Noah turned his attention to himself. He tried to pull off his wet, clinging clothes, but found his muscles too weak, too stiff with cold. After struggling to change, he collapsed onto his bed, utterly drained. "At least take a hot bath or a shower, Noah, and drink this tea," Eleanor urged. In this vulnerable state, the strong, capable man seemed even more helpless than the children. Perhaps sensing her concern, he mumbled, "Later, Eleanor, later. I just have no strength left." Soon all the men in the house, the big one and the two small ones, were deeply asleep. Eleanor quietly made her way to the kitchen, surveyed the contents of the refrigerator, and, with practised hands, began to prepare a comforting meal from the found ingredients. As she cooked, a profound sense of peace settled over her. She found herself savouring these simple domestic tasks, feeling a deep, quiet pleasure. She felt for the first time in a long time like the mother of a large, loving family. Here she was, welcoming her husband and sons home from an outing, watching them rest while she prepared their food. Wasn't this what everyone truly dreamt of? And, she thought with a sigh, no unpleasant surprises like betrayals. If only Noah didn't drink, she mused, a fleeting shadow of concern crossing her mind, though, she reasoned, he wasn't truly an alcoholic. He was just a man who had faced unimaginable betrayal and crumbled under the weight of it. But he hadn't just crumbled under the weight of his past, he hadn't endured the icy water well either. When Eleanor later stepped into the room to call him for dinner, she saw Noah burning with fever, his body trembling uncontrollably. Eleanor, however, was no stranger to handling such crises. She settled the boys at the table, then quickly located essential medicine in the small first aid kit and prepared a warm, soothing drink.
"Don't bother with me,"
Noah rasped, stirring awake.
"I'll just rest it off, it'll pass. Just bring me a shot of whiskey, that's the best medicine."
"Don't even ask for that," Eleanor replied sternly, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Drink this cranberry juice, and I'm going to the pharmacy right now. All you have here is antiseptic and aspirin." Eleanor couldn't leave a sick man, let alone a sick man with 2 young boys, and truthfully, the thought of returning to Daniel, to the bitter wasteland of their broken marriage, felt nauseating. So, to the utter delight of both boys, they remained to nurse the ailing Noah back to health. He too was quietly grateful, though still puzzled.
"It's strange," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "Ethan doesn't even have a sniffle, but me. What's wrong with me?"
He gave a weak, wry smile.
"Maybe it's because I don't want to recover."
"Why not?" Eleanor asked, surprised by his frankness.
"Well, why not?"
he repeated, a touch of melancholy in his voice.
"I'm lying here being cared for. My son is looked after. Why wouldn't I want to live like this? And if I get better, you'll leave."
He reached out, his chilled fingers gently touching her hand. "And who told you I want to leave?" Eleanor asked softly, her gaze holding his, a quiet promise in her eyes. She returned to her old apartment only to collect her and Ethan's belongings, and of course to inform Daniel that they were leaving for good. The divorce papers were already filed. Daniel attempted to voice his displeasure, his indignation, but Eleanor simply paid him no mind. The divorce itself proceeded with remarkable calm. Daniel, convinced that his own wedding was just around the corner, didn't offer much resistance. Eleanor, in turn, felt only a profound sense of relief that her old life, full of hidden disappointments, had finally ended. For a new one had begun, with a loving man, a wonderful father to their twin boys. But before she and Noah could even formalize their union, Daniel reappeared, demanding a reconciliation. His insistence was so aggressive, so volatile, that Noah finally had to physically escort him from the premises. Several neighbours witnessed the confrontation, their worried glances following Daniel's retreating figure. It was hardly surprising, then, when Daniel was found beaten and unconscious outside of town the next day. Noah became the immediate prime suspect. Fortunately, the investigation proved his alibi watertight, and Daniel, finally regaining consciousness, revealed that his assailant was another man entirely, the former furious boyfriend of his mistress Chloe. When Noah finally returned home from the police station, exhausted but cleared, Eleanor greeted him with a joyful, whispered revelation. "Noah, there will be 5 of us now."